So if that really speaks to the midlife crisis for me, because it's not even that it's a particular age. It's when we've reached that certain point of having a foundation in our lives. Life itself is then saying, okay, now let's start working on your purpose.
Obviously, I'm right, because this is my opinion. This is what I think. Why can't you just see that? And
so it's about when we have these arguments or when we have these triggers, how are we able to manage them, knowing that they're always invitations to own parts of ourselves, and most of it's just fucking mother shit for me.
Yeah, that's gas. Folks, welcome back to part 1 of a 2-part monster podcast with my guest for this episode, Mr. Niall Graham. Niall is a teacher, coach and mentor specialising in areas like men's work, ritual, sexuality and empowerment. And this was such a deep and interesting conversation. And to be honest with you, a very challenging conversation for me to be a part of, for Niall to be a part of, and for you to listen to. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation. I've split it into 2 just for ease of listening because it is quite deep and very, very intense in parts. But it was a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much to Niall, and I hope you enjoy. Folks, this episode of the podcast is sponsored by Flotation Therapy Ireland. They are experts in providing top-class flotation therapy in 2 locations in Dublin, Malahide Marina and Chancery Lane. Mr. Adam Ward is the owner, and he has kindly offered to give us 15% off any floats when you mention Prymal or the podcast or me. So make sure you check it out. Flotation therapy is outrageously good for your body and your mind. So treat yourself to some time off and book in your float session now. Make sure you mention Prymal or myself for 15% off your float. And for any gentlemen listening or any ladies with men in your lives, Niall is actually running a fantastic workshop called Strong Warrior Sensitive Heart. This is a men's workshop on Sunday the 20th of March from 2 to 6 p.m. And he's very kindly offered to give a 20% discount to listeners of this podcast. To book, you just need to contact Niall at niall.graham@hotmail.com or visit niallgraham.ie for more information. Welcome to our shared journey to find the answers to questions about health, wellness, nutrition, performance, life and success, and to craft the most resilient, hardy and happy humans you've ever seen. Welcome to the Prymal Podcast. Mr. Niall Graham.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, you're really welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'll give people a little bit of context. We've already had hours of deep and interesting and fascinating conversation, but I'm so excited to have you here in the studio, in the Prymal studio. Hope you like the environment.
I love it.
And I'm buzzing to be back in the hot seat here. It's been a little while since I've had a conversation like this on microphone, so I'm fascinated by this. Now, I'll give people a little bit of a heads up. Most likely we're going to do 2 or 3 or 4 versions of this conversation going forward into the future. But to dive straight in at the start and give people a little bit of context on your background before we get into this beautiful conversation, would you mind explaining who you are, where you come from? I feel like Cilla Black here on Blind Date, and a little bit of context about your background that has led you to the work that you do today, the amazing work you do today.
Great, thank you. I think my initial interest is around mythology and to put my life into the context of the greater story of what's trying to happen through me. So I was brought up in a religious environment, a religious home. And so there were a lot of like moral issues around that. There was a lot of like kind of a wanting to be a certain way. And I think that during my teenage years, then I had such limitation put on me as a person, as a man, as a being in this world, that there was something that happened to me when I was about 19 or 20, where I basically went a little bit mad. And I had this experience. There was a guy who lived up the road from us, and he was from South Africa, and he showed me some things. It was called a pendulum, where you have a piece of string and you have some a weight at the end of the string, and you ask questions. So I started doing this, and I think it was coming from a place of curiosity in me. It's like, I'm really bored here. I'm really depressed and really fucked off with life. So I started to do this thing, and all this unraveling started to happen. So I had 3 months. I've talked about this before. I had 3 months basically where I was in this heightened state of awareness. I was highly connected to other people. I was highly connected to some sense of meaning in life. And it culminated in me spending one night in my house, writing out all this information, breaking down the English language, breaking down the letter A into 3 I's, B into an I and 2 C's, C into C itself, E into 3 intersecting I's. So I worked out that C, I, and E were the foundation of the English language. So it was kind of like a scene from A Beautiful Mind, where all this madness all over the wall. And as far as I was concerned, I was just working out the universe, So I came from this kind of very depressed, kind of like a constricted way of being in the world, to experiencing this 3 months of unbelievable expansion, meaning, awareness, love, all these other things. But to the rest of the world, I was just going mental. So that became the foundation. As I moved out of that, then I was kind of a little bit in a state of shock, I think, for a period of months afterwards, going like, what happened? What did I go through? And how do I get back there on some level? How do I retain my own sense of normality in the world, not be mental? But the experiences that I had, how do I get back there? So that at the age of 20, then I did a yoga class. I came out of the yoga class and I saw this tree, maybe for the first time in my entire life. I saw the movement of the leaves. I saw the wind going through the leaves. I saw the tree itself as something real that I hadn't really seen before. And I made a decision in front of that tree, and this is etched in my mind. I was like, I'm going to fucking know everything that I can about life from this point forward. And that was the beginning of a journey. Now I'm 43 years old now. So it's been 23-year journey of unraveling, and it's a soul journey. Once we make this commitment to life, and I've studied a lot of the Lakota traditions, and they say that, one of the first things that we need to do in life whenever we're coming into this world is make a commitment to life itself. That we don't just come into this world and have an assumption that we're going to be living this life. We make a choice in this world to commit ourselves to this life. And without knowing it at the time, I made a commitment to life itself. I made a commitment to my own soul, the deeper parts of me, that I was going to be a full human in this world. Whatever fucking healing that I needed to do, whatever journey that I needed to go on, whatever difficulties I needed to go through, I needed to do that for myself. And I think that we had spoken about this earlier as well. And from that, then, that I bring that to the world. So I'm living out this soul journey that's trying to live through me all the time.
That's amazing. That's amazing to condense that story into a couple of minutes there. But you said you made a decision. Was this a conscious decision at this point, or it was a conscious decision? It was
a conscious decision in the sense that I knew that I knew in myself at that point that I wanted to learn everything there was about life. I wasn't aware of the impact of that, because anytime, I've had these moments over the years where I'm just like, okay, I'm not sure if what I'm doing here is actually serving me as a human. So we can recommit to life at any point in different ways if we choose to. But I still stand by that. And it's cost me a lot in life as well.
Yeah.
In terms of relationship, in terms of jobs, in terms of whatever. But I'm fully in alignment with my own soul, and I'm fully in alignment with my own life. And so it's about understanding that the context of my life is not within the context of society. It's not within the context of what my father wants from me. It's not within the context of what my school teachers wanted from me. It's about following my own soul. And I still stand in line with that commitment with life of I want to understand everything there is to know. And we can't. That's the mystery of the whole thing. We can't, because life is way beyond us as individuals, but we can certainly start on that journey. But we have pivotal moments in our lives where we maybe have to reassess and go is this actually serving me? What is my unconscious way of relating to life? Is that serving me? And do I need to change? And that leads us on to initiation.
Okay. Before I let you go to initiation, because that's a huge part of what we're going to talk about.
Sure.
The reason I asked you that question, and I found myself asking this question to many different people. And I explained to you just before we started here that a lot of what I speak about in general tends to be quite practical, medical. That's my background. It's what I've understood. But I learned loads of concepts and lessons through that world and that training that are now seem to be playing out in the spiritual or emotional world. And one of the questions that I always ask people is, do you believe that, number one, everybody has a choice? And the way I used to ask that was in terms of physical health. Does everybody have a choice to take control of their physical health? But how I now ask that question, and why I asked you, is do you think that to understand this or go on a journey like this or to actually live your life, number one, we have a choice, and number two, we need to make that choice in order to actually live. And then Pat said something to me, and I hadn't actually heard this, bizarrely hadn't heard this Carl Jung quote before: until we make the unconscious conscious, it will control our lives and we will call it fate. And I was like, that's the truth. Most of us, and I'll include myself in that, don't even know that there's a decision that we have to make. So there's no decision. I can't make it. Life is happening to me.
Yes.
But you've just explained that you've made a conscious decision to whatever, but you've made a decision to live your life, to take control, or to achieve a mission, or to funnel, to allow life to come through you and to funnel that onto other people.
Yeah.
So you believe that everybody has this choice and has to make this choice. They're two separate questions, I suppose. We all have a choice.
We all have a choice. The part that I'm holding on to in terms of what you're saying is, the question of, is life happening to me? But the bigger question is am I letting life happen through me? Okay.
I love it.
So to me is like, we have this sense of the outside world imposing on us. Through me is this sense that there's some deeper story that's trying to emerge within us. So I'm going to go back to Michael Meade. Michael Meade's one of my main teachers over the last number of years. So he talks about the idea of like the way that the story of life at the moment is that we are born into this world as a tabula rasa being a blank slate. So we're born into this world as soul beings. There's nothing on us. And then we have that idea of nurture, nature, we're born into this world with something that's already within us. And then the nurture aspect is like how society imposes on us, how our family imposes us, and so on. But for this whole tabula rasa thing, like, means that we're very much swayed by the world. We're very much swayed by society and other people's ideas and education and tuition and so on like that. But what Michael Meade says is that we're brought into this world with the story already written on our souls.
Okay.
So that means then, yes, I have full choice over my life, and I can speak to this in my own self. Whenever I made that decision at 20 years old that I'm going to like learn everything there is to know about life, I was also breaking away from my religious background that had this idea that God had a purpose for me. So I rebelled against that for 20 years. I was like, fuck this, I'm going to live the life that I want to live. But the problem with that is we have so much variety in society. I can live wherever the fuck I want to in the world. I can live whoever I want to, be with whoever I want to be in the world. I can have whatever job that I want to do in this world. So there's this kind of like influx of huge amounts of information. And Dr. Martin Shaw, he talks about the idea of tyranny of choice. And I know this, the tyranny in your brain. You're like, oh, Jesus, I could do anything in this moment,
Yeah.
But actually, when I started to reframe this, it was about 3 or 4 years ago, and I started to believe that the story of my life was already written on my soul. It's a choice to start listening to the inner being that's trying to emerge through us all the time. So there's choice within that. And, some would argue then, but if this thing that's already inside of us, then what choice do we actually have? But we do have a choice. We can either follow that, which leads to meaning, fulfillment, and a greater sense of I'm doing the life that I want to do. Or we can have full autonomy and decide, oh, fuck it, I'm not going to do any of that stuff. So I think following the story that's already within us leads to that sense of I'm doing life, I'm fully in alignment, and I'm being fulfilled in a way that I wouldn't if I was literally doing my own thing. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And actually, listening to you explain it like that, I'd imagine a lot of people listening now are kind of recognizing common sayings like finding your purpose.
Yeah.
I've often thought when you look at the traditional midlife crisis, I look at that and I think maybe is that a person who's ignored this inner voice for so long? And there's loads of bits to this. I'm going to ramble here for a second because I've had this conversation quite a lot lately.
Yeah.
You live a life where you do all the things that externally you're being told you're supposed to do. This is a common story now, it's being told. So you have the job, you have the car, you go to school, you do all the things. But there's some level of conflict there. It doesn't feel right. In your gut, deep down inside somewhere, it doesn't feel quite right. But you ignore that because to acknowledge that is absolutely fucking terrifying. It's terrifying because it's going to pull you off the path that you've been on for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And you're going to have to say to yourself, you've been fucking kidding yourself. You're going to have to call bullshit on yourself. And I'm very familiar with this now. Up until about 2 years ago, I wasn't familiar with this process at all. I was literally ignoring all of those feelings inside me because I knew I was going to have to call bullshit on myself. So when you explain this, that story is very familiar to me, and I look at the midlife crisis, and I know there's many ways this can happen. But to me, what that represents is somebody who's potentially been ignoring that inner message or feeling or whatever you want to call it for so long that they can't ignore it anymore, that the things they are now doing and the new motorbike and the big job and all that aren't fulfilling those needs.
Yes.
And they're conflicted. And what happens? They have a physical, emotional, spiritual breakdown. An erosion of this thing that they have built for themselves that they think is life, and the thing that they know is life is knocking on the door, and that's an argument that they don't want to have. So maybe there's drink, or maybe there's a breakup, or maybe there's that's what I see now. And when you explain what you've just explained, that almost paints that picture for me. I'm like, yeah, that links up. That makes perfect sense when you see so many people especially nowadays, at conflict with, I don't know what my identity is, my purpose is, but I know there's something, but I don't want to go there because it's scary, it's terrifying. So I'll just live this miserable life, or I'll just try and join another club where we can all get angry and I'll find my purpose there, or I'll become a Democrat, or I'll join this social movement or whatever, and that'll fulfill. Oh, it didn't. Shit. New Beamer. That'll do. I'll get it. Oh, bollocks, that didn't do it either. Now, I'm not speaking from experience there, I'm just speaking from observation there. I've had my own stuff, but does that make sense? Is that
yeah,
am I picking it up right, what you're saying? Yeah,
absolutely. And what when I was listening to you, fully understanding that, and there are two aspects that come to me. I work with an organization called the Animus Valley Institute, and Bill Plotkin, he's an author.
Okay.
He's an author, and so he talks about this idea of the survival dance and the sacred dance, and so we need to do the survival dance first because we need to pay the bills. We need to set ourselves up. We need to, get ourselves into a comfortable environment. But some of us then choose, for the exact reasons that you're talking about, from the fear, are terrified of because the ego holds on to routine. The ego holds on to the familiar. And that's where it wants to say, whenever this thing that's trying to come through, what we would maybe refer to as the sacred dance, the ego's like, no, don't go there. As you say, buy another Beamer, do all that sort of stuff. So whenever we have fulfilled that survival dance, when we have the car, when we wake up in the morning, we can drink our coffee, we can, have our hug with our partner or do whatever the basic needs are. That's when the sacred dance starts knocking on the door. And I said, no. You've got your foundation sorted now. Now we need to move somewhere else. And we can choose to listen to that. So that really speaks to the midlife crisis for me, because it's not even that it's a particular age. It's when we've reached that certain point of having a foundation in our lives. Life itself is then saying, okay, now let's start working on your purpose.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And what I actually think, and maybe you can comment on this, because I'm only actually thinking of this as I'm saying it here now. The midlife crisis is traditionally associated with the 45, 50-year-old, the middle of the life, and you've got all this security, and just as you've explained there. But what I observed from working in the clinic for so long, and just now from observing general society, is there seems to be a crisis happening way younger. And I don't know, is it because life has been expedited and we have access to all of this messaging much earlier? You should be here at this point in your life. You're 18, you should have a side hustle and be thinking of investment, and you should be all these different things and have opinions on all these different political things. So when you're very young now, you're being told this is where you should be. And you're conflicted with that because, like, when you're 18, 17, you don't know anything. You don't know what the hell is going on with anything, let alone when you get to 40 or 50. So I see that type of crisis of identity happening not just as a midlife crisis anymore. I see it happening much, much younger with much, much more people. Would you say that's a fair comment? Would you have observed that?
I think it's a fair comment, and I also think because we're in this state now, the last maybe 30, 40, 50 years, that's the archetypal journey of life. We're breaking out of that,
Yeah.
So the whole education, university, find a partner, have kids, buy a house, find a career, all that sort of stuff. We're breaking out of that now. And so there are healthy aspects to that in the sense that we can start to choose our own lives, but we also don't have any direction within that. So there's the chaotic part of that as well, of just fuck, I don't know what to do. So there's safety in knowing what we're supposed to do, and the 3 stages of my life is okay, I've been told all these things that I'm supposed to be. I don't want to do that. Now I'm in this like 20-year gap of like I can do whatever I want to, but no direction within that. And now like settling into like there's a life that's trying to emerge through me, so that I have another framework for my own life now. Because if I'm sitting up here in my own thoughts and mind thinking I could be a fucking rapper.
I'd like to see
I
that.
could be a podcaster.
Yeah.
I could be a doctor. Do you know, we don't have a framework, a reference framework there. So it's been useful. And I'm not saying for everyone, but what I will say is I would suggest that even in this moment, those of us who are listening to this, what is the deeper thread that's trying to emerge in your life? And I think most of us have that.
Yeah.
And that becomes the framework. Not like what everybody says out there who wants to be famous or earn more money or drive bigger fucking cars. What is that instinct inside of you that keeps on knocking on your door, that keeps you awake at nighttime, inviting you into something deeper? That's what I'm interested in. So I think there is a framework there, and the framework is our own soul, but we're just too scared to go down there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And as you're saying, framework, I look at this country, for example. You mentioned you had a religious upbringing, and there was a lot of negative connotations to a religious upbringing. But one thing that I constantly comment on, now I'm not a religious person, is there was a framework. There was a comfort and a set of guiding rules or principles.
Yeah.
Do good to other people. Don't steal. Don't murder anybody. Here's how to live a good life. And now it was shrouded with all this madness and mystery of religion. But the principles in general were good. And they gave you a framework. And if I look at Ireland, because that's my experience, when I was growing up in Ireland, I had a pretty okay idea of how to be a good person. Whether I followed it or not is different. And whether I resisted the religious side or not is another story. But there was a framework there. We don't have that now at all. And like you said, we have a plethora of other competing frameworks, and most of them are false. And they're telling you, this is the way to do it. No, this is the way to do it. This is the way to do it. So yeah, I find that fascinating that you've really kind of tidied that up nicely in my head for me, because I think about these ideas all the time, especially the religious thing. We haven't replaced it with anything. So for me, there's no surprise when I look at all this craziness going on at the moment, all these groups shouting at each other about whatever, like insert topic here. Everyone is really angry and lost and disconnected. So they're trying to find these tribes. They're trying to externalize this sense of identity. They don't want to go in, so they go out.
Yes.
Much easier to go out.
Yes.
And now we literally have the tools for that, where we can go out against everybody else in the world and we can let everyone know how we feel. But we actually don't know how we feel, because we're not going in to figure it out. We're attaching ourselves to these ideologies and ideas because we don't have anything in our own lives. Not anything, but we don't have that structure, that framework ourselves, the actual framework that we need. So I find that fascinating. I've taken you way off point here. I didn't even let you finish your introduction there. So you gave us your background. What exactly is it that you do now? What is your role at the moment?
Like it's kind of evolved and evolving. Like I work primarily with men at the moment. I work a lot with mentoring. I work with a lot of men's organizations. So the Mankind Project, that is a global charity that initiates men. So I work with them on a voluntary basis, and we initiate men. We're going to be doing an initiation in Clare in May, from the 13th to the 15th of May. So I work with the Mankind Project in terms of working with men. And so we're meeting every 2 weeks in what's known as an I group, and we do our work there. We do our process work, and it's about building brotherhood with men, about understanding what it is to be men in this world at this time, and really supporting each other with that, of owning our own shit, of owning our own shadows. What are the kind of things that are acting out in our lives that we need to change, and getting the support of other men to be like, well, this is the thing that you do. How do you want to change that? So we're really like challenging each other within that. It's also then, it's an initiation program. So there's a weekend where people get to do that initiation that hasn't been done in societies. So that's the Mankind Project. We're also, myself and another 10 men, are creating an organization called Tribe in Ireland, which is an affiliation of a band of brothers in England, which is a rites of passage and mentorship organization for young men. So it's about understanding that there are young men that are falling through the gaps here, and that the suicide rate of young men in Ireland is catastrophic. So it's about creating an organization to support these men who are just not getting that sense of meaning in life, not getting that understanding of why they're here. So I work with those two organizations. Individually, then I work with mentoring. I also create ritual. I do grief rituals. And I also work with sexuality. It's about understanding the necessity of having a healthier relationship with our own sexuality as men. So it's really about supporting that like downward journey into soul, into grief, into power, into sexuality. And as far as I'm concerned as a man, that's my journey. How do I go into being a deeper sense of a man in this world? So it's a real interest for me as on my own individual journey. And also it's just something that I'm bringing then to the world through that as well, you know.
That's amazing. It's amazing work, and people will be familiar with some of the terms that you've mentioned there, men's work and initiation and things like that. But because it seems to be a conversation that's starting to happen now, which is great because it's coming to the forefront of people's minds. I want to put a bit of context on this, not that it needs it, but just I like to do this if people are listening. The conversation that we're going to have is so important, I think, because at the moment there's a lot of conversation around men and women, around integration or lack of integration, around identity, around purpose, around these phrases like toxic masculinity, feminism. And I feel, my opinion, so you can disagree, people can disagree if they want, but I feel that in most of these conversations that we all observe, so the conversations we would see on social media, which is where most people, to be fair now, are engaging in these types of conversations, they're missing the point of the conversation, which is to bring us together, which is to learn, which is to grow. And when I observe these conversations, it seems the objective is to win the argument and to make a point and to establish a hierarchy of opinion or something like that. So when I'm looking at a lot of these arguments, or conversations, let's call them conversations. When I'm looking at all these conversations and debates, I don't see the point when they get to the end of having had that conversation, because it just has descended into an argument, and we're trying to find blame and point fingers and things like that.
Yeah.
And for me, why I love having these conversations with men and with women is to really try and gain an understanding for myself, and by extension anybody else who cares or wants to listen, of where this anger and emotion and trauma and aggression and confrontation is coming from. I want to understand that first, and by understanding that, then maybe I can have a valuable opinion or a bit of input into this, because I'm fully aware that I'm a man. I'm fully aware I have my flaws and my experiences and my biases and all that kind of stuff. I'm fully aware I have my own kind of biases when I'm listening to conversations, and I tend to gravitate towards stuff I agree with, and like everybody. But I'm really trying to work with that. And this conversation and the information you're going to share and the chat we're going to have is really important, I think, in the context of the landscape of what's happening at the moment, because I'm going to really try and learn from this. And whether you're male or female or think you have an interest in this or not, I think this is massively important. The work you're doing is incredibly important. But I just wanted to share that bit of context for this conversation, because you said something really important as well, and I think I echoed this on one of our phone calls. The whole purpose behind doing this on microphone, we could meet for a coffee and have this conversation, and I would learn so much from it, and it'd be amazing. We'd be friends and we'd go on with our lives. But the reason we're doing this on mic is because we genuinely want to contribute to the conversation and help and bring people in. Would that be fair? Yeah,
well, we're contributing to the collective consciousness, because as individuals, then our soul is trying to live through us. As a collective being, this information is trying to get through.
Yeah.
And we need to, you talked about this earlier on, we need to be channels for that conversation. That's the only way we're going to fucking change.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, well, I'm going to give you the floor for a little while here, and I'm going to ask you, how do you view the current landscape when it comes to masculinity and men, and with the context of women and females there as well? But obviously a lot of your work is with men, so that's what you're experienced with. I don't know, you're experienced with the female side of things too, but how do you view the current landscape? Because I've given you my opinion, but I'd be very interested in how you view it with men and mental health. I'm not being derogatory when I use this kind of quotation marks, but I don't know if that conversation, when people talk about mental health, is actually a mental health conversation. I think it's just kind of it's a nice word to use sometimes.
Yeah, it's a tidy word.
It's a tidy word.
People can relate to it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with something here that is really through listening to you, and this is the beauty of having these conversations, is like something comes into me or to you or whatever, and we can lead maybe into the men part afterwards. I think the major thing that really comes to mind in terms of where we are at the moment is this idea of what you're talking about, externalizing our inner conflict. So if we don't understand that how we're relating to the world, and that the judgments that we have on the world is actually the judgments on deeper parts of ourselves, we're going to continuously be in this argument of blaming the world for our own problems. When we start to take our projections on the world, there's a lot of stuff we do in the men's work. Take our projections from the world and start putting them onto ourselves. What are the parts of ourselves that are arrogant? What are the parts of ourselves that are dictatorial? What are the parts of ourselves that are argumentative? You know what I mean? And start to really internalize. This creates that sense of autonomy in our own being, you know? So it's really important, as you said, that Pat talked about this idea of and Jung talks about the unconscious parts of us that we do not acknowledge are lived out in life, and we call it fate. So we blame the world and say, life just fucked me over. Yeah. No. There are parts of your psyche that you're not looking at that are being projected onto the world so that you can see it more clearly. So this is understanding who we are as humans. We have a conscious and we have an unconscious mind. So that's the first thing. We are fully autonomous with our lives. And the more that we can look at our projections onto the world, the more we can understand ourselves, and we can start to own the parts of us that we're disempowering our own self within our own psyche. Next on from that, I'm gonna refer to Michael Meade here because I just think he's a beautiful being. I just love this man in terms of his teaching. I really recommend anyone to listen to him. He's a mythologist, he's a storyteller, and he's just like connected to something amazing. So he has a framework for life as we know it at the moment, and this ties in with Bill Plotkin as well, who's been a real teacher for me. Being brought up in a religious environment, there's this idea that we are all one. And we're all these peaceful, loving, beautiful beings, okay? So within my life then, I had a lot of this conflict, all these difficulties. I had all this kind of destructive ways that I was living. I was just drinking, I was smoking. I was just, because I had this appeal to the parts of me that I wasn't allowed to be whenever I was young, okay? So whenever I read Soulcraft, a book by Bill Plotkin, he talks about the ascendant spirituality and the descendant spirituality. So we're not necessarily just going one way here into the world of spirit, into the world of connection, into the world of oneness. There's actually another spirit. There's another part of life. This is the descent. Down into the soul, down into the complexity, down into the grief and the sadness that we're fucked up humans in this world just trying to work all that shit out. So I was really, there was an allurement in that because there was soul down there, there was sexuality, there was darkness, there was depth, there was descent, there was beauty, you know, of being a human in this world at this time. So that started to separate out this idea from there's just one way of being, as religion is kind of saying we all need to go back to God, you know. And I was like, oh, actually, no, maybe we need to go back to our animal nature, go back to our primal.
Yeah, I love it.
So coming back to Michael Meade then, so he talks about this idea of spirit, which is upward, ascending, one way of thinking, focused, this real culture of like happiness and aspiring to like being more expansive humans. And there's soul. Now, soul is about multiplicity. Soul is about complexity. It's about holding polarized ideas and standing in the center of that. So when we really gather soul, when we really gather that sense of depth within us, we can hold separation, polarity, division, conflicting ideas, and we don't have to necessarily go with either one. But we live in a society now where it's very spirit ascendant based, where it's all upward looking, and this is the right way of being. You know, I think that the pandemic is a prime example of that. If you don't follow the narrative, then you're really you're a danger to society, you know what I mean? So that's, for me, that's spirit thinking. And this is not about saying that any of this is wrong, but we're in an unbalanced society where we don't look at dissent, we don't look at soul, we don't accept that people have different ideas about life. And we don't know how to hold that. We don't have the presence in our own beings to be able to hold conflicting ideas and still find our own sense of presence, because we get very wrapped up in our identity and our ideas and what's the right way of doing things. So I think this is very important to say where we're going in terms of initiation, in terms of descent, in terms of soul and so on. We're going down into the depths of ourselves, and that can lead us on to masculinity then. It's like we need to go become deeper humans.
Yeah. I really like what you said there about balance. It's not necessarily about being good or bad. It's about finding a balance. You don't have to, because you're right. I think you made a comment on society today. You have to pick a thing and be that thing. And you have to be everything about that thing then. Because if you pick a group or a side or a tribe or a political party, you have to align yourself with absolutely every single part of that to be that thing. But that's not how life works. I mean, we can have differing opinions and still be friends. That's one way where we strike a balance.
Yeah.
I don't agree with everything you said,
Yeah.
but I like you as a friend because you contribute this to my life and I contribute this, so we can have a balance between us.
Yeah.
It's not like I don't like this thing that you said, so we're not friends anymore.
Sure.
And I think that's happening at the moment.
Yes.
And my opinion is that the reason it's happening is because we are searching for that thing to attach ourselves to.
Yeah.
So we just accept, if I want to be part of this group, this is who I am now. And it's almost a subconscious thing because we're not accepting that the balance between the different aspects of the spiritual journey that you mentioned there. I love that. Yeah. That's really, really powerful. And sorry, go on.
So just to say, the deeper we go into ourselves, the more diversity we can hold. And I don't need another person to be a certain way to make me feel better, because I have my own depth of presence and I'm able to hold other people's differing opinions and still love them completely.
Yeah. And it does require a huge amount of connection and anchoring in yourself, because I'm recognizing when you're saying that, and I speak about this sometimes as well. When somebody says something to me that challenges my opinion, my initial reaction is, fuck you, pal, I'm going to fight this tooth and nail, aggression, I'm going to push back. It's not hear what this person has just said, accept it, and either integrate some of it, don't integrate some of it, make a decision, allow it to pass through you, and then move on, and then we're friends. That's not the reaction that I would have, because I've had 28, 30 odd years of training to do the opposite thing, to immediately defend my stance, because that's an attack on me as a person.
Sure.
And I'm starting to understand now, and I'm only starting to understand this, by the way. I do it maybe 5% of the time. If somebody challenges my opinion or what I think, sit with it for a sec and go, oh, I like this person. This thing that they've said is the thing that they've said. It's not a personal attack on the core of my belief. Yeah. But what I feel is just a comment on me is the more connection I have with me and my anchor and who I am and my beliefs. And you're absolutely right. I have way more space to listen to people who I disagree with and to accept and to see them as more than the thing that they've just said and a challenge on the thing that I believe. But I can only do that like when I'm not feeling good, or I'm tired, or I'm fatigued, or I haven't done a bit of work on myself. It's much more difficult for me to do that. So I completely understand what you're saying there. It's powerful, yeah.
So just finding that anchor that we're not our thoughts, we're not our ideas, and that actually we are something deeper than that. And once we're really grounded and connected to that sense of presence, that sense of soul, then we can hold differing opinions, and understanding that actually, like, I was doing a Mankind Project weekend a few years ago, and there was this Aussie guy. I'm going to do a terrible Aussie accent.
Go for it.
So he sat in the circle, and I was going through my own bollocks at the time, and he was like, do you know what? Whenever I get fucking triggered, I get fucking excited. And I was like, oh, here we fucking go. Because I know on the other side of that trigger is fucking gold, do you know? But he had a point, and I remember reacting to it at the time going like, fuck this, like all my triggers are just bollocks,
Yeah.
But he had reached that point in himself where he was able to see that whenever he was triggered, when he worked through that work and find out what was the trigger instigating in him, what was the learning that was trying to happen in him in terms of the trigger, that he was able to own parts of himself through the trigger. And he was able to own the gold, as he calls it. And I think this is really beautiful as well in terms of mythology. We need to go through the darkness. We need to go into the clay, into the earth to find that gold that's buried in there. And that just takes a lot of dirt, a lot of time, a lot of searching, a lot of fucking around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's about understanding that the more then that people trigger us or the more difficulty we have in society, instead of us trying to change them to make us feel better, instead of us distracting ourselves with drugs, alcohol, porn, whatever the fuck else we do, really like go into that. What is happening in my body here and what is it leading me towards? What is the goal on the other side of this? Because the more I own my projections in the world, the more I become more whole man. That's the truth of the matter here. And the more I start owning my own anger and stop blaming the world for my own bullshit, the more whole I become.
I think that is one of the most powerful lessons, men aside, that a person can learn today,
Sure.
especially.
Sure.
Stop projecting
Stop projecting.
and own it. Own it. It's funny, actually. There was a. Did you ever watch Suits? Do you remember the show Suits?
Oh, yes, yeah.
There was a line that your man Harvey Specter said in Suits, that I had been feeling all these feelings that, as you've explained there, just that concept of owning it and going through the darkness and really struggling to, like the Australian guy said, when this shit comes, there's a little part of me that's excited because I know on the other side of it, if I can work through this, there's absolute gold. And I remember Harvey Specter said something like, find the pain and press on it, because he was trying to leverage somebody to take over their company or something not so pure. Yeah. But he said, find the pain and press on it, because that's where the answer is.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, of course. I've been thinking of all this shit, and he said it in one line. Find the pain, press on it, go into that, even though it's really uncomfortable. Like when you've got something sore, you want to protect it and wrap it up and press on that shit. And on the other side, if you have a process for working through it, and I don't mean just descend into the chaos and wallow in it. Like if you have a process for working through that, or a guide or someone who can help you, there's gold on the other side of that. Absolute gold.
And sometimes we need to go into the chaos. You know, like in what you shared about your life, like going through this dark time for a period of time. Sometimes we need to go through that. So that's an initiation that's happening in life through us.
Yes.
And also some people can get stuck in that. And I feel like I've witnessed some men in Ireland who are kind of stuck in that because we have so much trauma in this country as men, because of our history, because of colonization, because of the church, because of the disempowerment. I think a lot of us are kind of in this suspended state, a suspended initiation that Francis Weller talks about. So we need support to get out of that. And we also need to recognize what's happening before we can actually reach out for support. And I think some of us can work through it on our own with our families or something happens, but some other of us actually get stuck in that. And I think it's really important to know that we are whole. In some parts of us, there is a wholeness to us, and that we reach out to that part of us and say, okay, I need to do something about myself here because I'm kind of wallowing in this thing now and I don't really know how to get out of this hole.
Yeah.
So it's really important to recognize and be aware of our lives, what's going on with us at any particular time. Do we need support? You know, in tribal cultures, we always had support. We always had the elders. We always had mentors. We always had the people who were able to support the individual things that were happening in our lives. And because they had a framework for initiation, because they had a framework that difficulty was part of life, that death was part of life, they were able to recognize whenever people were going through these difficult times, and they were able to do something about it. We don't have that framework in culture. We're supposed to be happy fucking individuals getting along with our jolly days of going to work, coming home, watching Netflix. So we don't have this framework of understanding the difficulty as part of life, as a way of soul trying to come into this world more and more. And this is what's happening now. And this is what's happened with the pandemic. We've all been forced to sit at home and deal with our own bollocks.
Yeah.
And for those of us who haven't dealt with our own bollocks, now we're shouting at the world and starting to blame everyone else for our own bollocks, you know?
Yeah, I actually heard a good one at some point during, I can't remember who said it, but it was like, it's a perfect recipe for us to descend even further away from the sense of community. Is make us sit at home and drip feed us fear.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not getting into conspiracy here. I'm like, everything you read on this thing is designed to gain reaction. So it's fear and it's anger and it's all this scary stuff. You're literally locked up by yourself at home in your house with an IV of fear every single day. How was this going to work out any other way? Would you mind explaining, because you mentioned something there, we're going to move, we're getting closer to this initiation piece. I can feel it. It's coming, but I don't want to go there just yet because I think we need a little bit of context. You mentioned in this country specifically masculine trauma. because of our history. Would you mind explaining that a little bit just for context for people?
Sure. Well, like it was a very unknown thing for me, and I think that understanding our own lineage and our own like family ancestry line is really important. I'm going to say a little bit about my story here.
Please.
So I'm Protestant Irish. My family came here in the 1600s. My mother's side is Bradshaw. They were Yorkshire, Lancashire, North England. My father's side is Graham, so he was Scottish. Actually, Graham was the right-hand man of William Wallace. So we came here in the 1600s. That's traveling back in my family. So as a Protestant Irish man, we would have been come over here in the plantations. I think we was in County Down we ended up. So that's in my psyche. The arrogance of being brought over for another country, being given a piece of land, and being able to have that privilege and being told that we are better than people from this country, that's still alive in me. I didn't even know that until well into my 30s about what was going on inside of me, because we were the only Protestant family in school. I was brought up in Monaghan, and we were the only Protestant family. And from my religious background, then my family said to me, well, Catholics, they don't know what they're talking about. They're worshipping like the Virgin Mary and stuff, So as a child who takes things like this literally, I was just like, well, I'm better at these guys. They're all going to hell,
Yeah.
So it's really important to look at our lineage and to look at like what's the story of our lives. So then taking in other aspects of that, we were colonized by England for over 400 years, 400 or 500 years. So we were dominated by another culture. So in terms of masculation in Ireland, if you look at going back to the penal laws and so on, if you look at the advertisements that were put in England about the drunken Irishman and how we're ridiculous. Like we're ridiculous, we're drunkards, we're stupid, and we're violent. Like that's how those cartoon drawings were depicted to English people. That has an effect on the psyche of the English people, and it has the effect on the psyche of the Irish people. So that's still part of us now, the drunken Irish fool.
Yeah.
And that still lives in our deep psyche. And I know that from myself because I lived in England, and I used to get really fucking pissed off whenever I was living in Bristol, and people would be all like, oh, you're not going to have like a Guinness? And I was like, I don't even fucking drink, mate, and I fuck off. But it's that like story that's kind of put onto Irish men in terms of our drunkenness. Like I'm not saying, I'm kind of generalizing here.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And then we also had the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Church then were all about these moral rules about how we were supposed to be as men and how we were supposed to be moral, upstanding citizens and so on. And then obviously within the last number of years, we've had the priests and the sexual stories that have come up around that and so on. So whenever I was living in England, I lived in a place called Embercombe, and I remember a friend of mine, he was actually the guy that led me into the Mankind Project. And I was just going through some bollocks, and he said to me, he said, well, no wonder, with the emasculation of the Irish male. And I was taken aback by this because I hadn't realized it at the time. This is around 2011, 12 or something. And when I started to really think about it, I was like, okay, I actually feel this in my body now. The emasculation of myself. And actually, we also have these dynamics in Irish culture. We have the strong woman at home who's holding all the shit together. And then we have the guy who's out drunk in the pub. Now that's changing, but it's also part of our psyche as well. And in my own family then, having quite a strong mother and having what I would consider like an emasculated man as a father, and having three sisters, so the feminine was very strong in my family, but I didn't have any role model for the masculine. So these are all compounded on my journey of what is it to be a masculine male in Ireland at this time, because I had no fucking idea. I didn't have role models. I wasn't brought up in a home with a strong masculinity. I was brought up in an education system that was very much ruled by the church, and it was not about us being able to own our own sexuality, about us being able to own our own sense of purpose, We had to follow these rules that were set out to us. And then obviously we were told that we were just drunken paddies. Mm-hmm. So there's just layers of shit on the masculine psyche. And I made a decision whenever I was going to come back to Ireland. It's like, I can't be that masculine male on this land anymore. If I'm going to come back to this country and really live here, because I came back for the land of Ireland, because I'm from this country and my heart and my soul are connected here. But I have to do the work to support the masculinity in this country, to work through this trauma, to work through this healing, and really find what is the depth of the masculine presence and focus that is beyond our stories of trauma.
As you're speaking now, I'm going to tell you what my reaction initially is based off what we've just spoken about.
And I'd love to hear your story. I don't know if you can, like,
yeah,
but
100%.
in relation to that, because I've kind of revealed some of my story and what shaped me as a soul masculine being in this island. And I'd love to hear a little bit from you.
Absolutely, yeah. My reaction, my feeling, my programming when you speak about this concept is that bottle's giving you hassle.
I just don't want to make all the crinkly plastic sounds.
There's loads of ASMR on this podcast.
Okay.
People slurping coffee and dropping things. My initial reaction, which I would imagine would be familiar and people might recognize this as I say it, is you're talking about the 1600s and people coming over here. I am a modern man.
Okay, yeah,
I'm in
good.
control.
Good.
I make my decisions.
Sure.
And immediately, only now in the space that I'm in now, I recognize that arrogance of thinking that I can overcome the programming of all of these years. Because I was thinking about it as you were speaking, your family in the 1600s were involved in this process in Ireland. So your great-great-great-grandfather lived his life a certain way. And what did he do? He taught his son. And the daughters, obviously. He taught his children. And what did they do? They taught their children. And what do? We pass along. We become, especially back then when we didn't have the internet, we had our close little bubble. So almost everything you learned and how to be and how to live was based on your community, your family, your tribe, the people you were surrounded by. Because you had no access to anything else.
Yes.
So as you were speaking, as I said, my initial reaction was, I'm in control of that kind of stuff. My second reaction was the arrogance of me, your man, thinking I'm in control of that. So I started thinking about it. Obviously, all of that stuff has such a massive effect on who we are because it crafted the people who came before us, who in turn crafted us.
Yes.
So
it's in our DNA. It's science. It's science. It's in our DNA, you know, and they say that the unexpressed trauma from our past is passed on to us in our genes.
Yeah.
So we can't get away from this.
No, but we think we can.
We think we can. Well, society tells us we can. You're a fully autonomous being. You can do whatever you want in this world. And then we have all this trauma that's like in our background, like screaming at us, you know, in the nighttime and the winters in Ireland. And we're like, what's this thing? I'm an autonomous being, you know?
Yeah. To answer your question, my childhood was your average Irish childhood. My father actually came from a very religious background, was studied the priesthood, never actually became a priest, but touch wood for me, because that's the only reason I'm here. So very religious background.
Yes.
Catholic.
Yep.
I had a very, very good upbringing in terms of all my needs were met. From a physical, I say this differently now. And I've spoken to my parents about this. All my needs were met from the physical point of view. I never wanted for anything. Very happy childhood. With 3 younger sisters. I was the only boy. And what I have now identified is my dad was the stereotypical. No, sorry, he wasn't the stereotypical Irish male in terms of. He wasn't the man in the pub. He wasn't the escaping from the family. Yeah. He was a leader. But to his. What I now recognize to his detriment and my detriment, he did everything. Everything for our family.
Okay.
Everything for me. Sure. And looking back now, I was so privileged as a child. Not that we had loads of money or anything like that, but I never needed to do anything. If something broke, my dad fixed it. Now, he would show me if I asked him how to do it, but he would do it. And in my childhood years, my teenage years, my young adult years, same thing. Right now, if I needed something, my dad would do it for me. And it's only now I'm recognizing that I needed something else when I was younger. And he didn't know that, and I didn't know that, and nobody knows this really. We start to understand it now. But he did so much for me and took such good care of me that I never had the challenge that I now believe I needed, or as we'll speak about. I'm just dropping these in here. The initiation, we're going to get there, don't worry. But I didn't have an initiation process. I didn't have a transition from boyhood into manhood, in my opinion. Yeah. I've shared this before. You alluded to it there. I had a very, very difficult time a few years ago where I really struggled with my head and my mindset, my sense of being, my purpose. It was a really dark place for a while. And as we'll discuss, that probably was a form of initiation for me. But until that point, for 29 years, I never had the challenge consciously put in front of me, or never had to consciously deal with any of this programming or trauma or masculine trauma, historical trauma, family trauma, anything at all. It wasn't a conversation that anybody in my circle and my family was even aware needed to be had. So to round all that up, I'm forever grateful to my parents, my friends, my family. I had an amazing upbringing, but it left me with this absolute chaos in my head. Who am I? What the hell am I doing? I always felt a little bit different. Anyone who knows me knows my path has been very obscure compared to, I resisted the traditional path. I resisted going down I went to college, but it didn't make sense to me. I fought the whole way. When I got out, I was like, the only thing I've learned here is how little I know. I didn't want to go and just get a job. And I always say this, absolute admiration for people who are able to grind this out and are doing amazing and are doing incredible in those worlds. I resisted it. It's not for me. I can't fit myself in there, to the point where I had this absolute horrible time for a couple of years. I was dealing with this madness and chaos. And I believe it was a build-up of a lack of exploration, challenge, introspection, exploration for 29 years. So my amazing childhood led me to a point where I had this insane internal trauma. I went through that. We'll talk about the initiation piece. And as I sit in front of you here now, I said to you before, I crave that pain point. I don't like it. It feels really uncomfortable. It's scary. There's loads of fear. But I crave. We've had several phone conversations. I was so excited to have you in today to delve deep, for myself, selfish reasons, to delve deeper into what you could explain to me about me, or what you could observe about me based on your experience. So that's my story.
Great.
As we sit here now, as I said, my mission is to explore this more, to go into that pain more. And I fail a lot of the time because it's terrifying, and I'm a human being, and I shy away from it a lot. But that's what I think I want to do for the rest of my life, is explore that, because I'll never figure it out. But maybe I can start to acknowledge some of this programming, this trauma, this masculine conflict.
Yes, good. So there's loads of that. That's really interesting.
Unpack that.
The first part that really sits with me is the idea of soul, and the trajectory of soul, the life of soul, is that soul is very much connected to nature. And when we think about nature, we also think about cycles. There's the understanding that death is part of the cycle, So in terms of the soul, then it follows a similar trajectory, because some would suggest that soul is very much related to nature. It's related to the feminine aspect of us, related to earth. So there's an understanding that death, life, and rebirth are part of life. So as we continue as soul, as beings who are related to soul as opposed to ego, that we will continuously want to go on these journeys, and we will continuously want to be, the ego will be dying to its own sense of identity to make way for something else that's trying to emerge. So you will be continuously on this journey for the rest of your life. And that's very exciting, because you become in alignment with your own soul. You become in alignment with nature itself. The struggle comes when we really start to deny or run away from this thing that's trying to happen through us, which is soul. You know what I mean? So that's the first part of that. I forget the next part.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because a picture I've painted before is this idea of a monster, a big, dark, scary monster that I feel like I've been running away from. And when you turn and acknowledge the monster, it's not any less scary, but now it is less scary. It's still a monster. It is definitely a monster.
Sure.
So you weren't making it up. But now that you've turned and you've faced the monster, now you can address it. Now you can do battle, or you can have a conversation, or whatever way you want to use the analogy. And it's so easy to turn and keep running again, and to feel that fear and run away from it.
Yeah.
But unless you turn and face it, you're never going to deal with it.
Yeah.
Because you have to be able to see it. You have to know what it is. You have to understand it.
Yeah.
You have to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
So that's what I feel my life is now. I'm still have periods where I'm running away, but now I have an awareness. I'm like, oh, fuck, you're running away, man. Just turn the fuck around
Great.
and have a look at it. Oh,
Great.
shit, yeah, it actually is fucking scary.
Yeah.
You weren't mad,
Yeah.
but now you can see it.
Yeah.
So now, what are you going to do?
Yeah. And it will be continuously scary. Like, I know all these frameworks now and I'm still like struggling,
Yeah.
whenever these things are trying to catch up with me, you know what I mean? Because deeper layers of soul are trying to emerge and they're more scary and they're bigger monsters, So even though I know that monsters are coming, whenever that monster's there, I still don't want to deal with it, you know what I mean? So it's about understanding that we can't fool life here, We can't understand life and then not live it, So these monsters are always going to be at our back. And the more, like, I just have to keep reminding myself, that, I think I said on Pat's podcast before, is like, I had this experience at the end of last year where something was trying to happen to me. And even though I know these frameworks, I didn't recognize what was happening. And at some point, as you said, like a real word you used there was awareness. When I brought in that awareness, I was like, oh, something's trying to happen here. I need to go with this. And then I just fucking slept beside the river for the night and let this thing happen to me, And so these things are a necessary part of life. And once we have these frameworks and we can start to accept these things and stop like running away from them our whole lives, because it's really quite boring after a period of time. If we really start accepting them and go through these changes and transformations that are happening to us, then we can start to do the journey that we're supposed to do. So coming back a little bit to your story in terms of your life, the word that you kept using was you need that challenge. You needed that challenge in life. My story, your story are very different. I was trying to get away from my childhood. You said your childhood was quite healthy, but we still both needed that challenge.
Yeah.
We still both needed that initiation. So in terms of the context of the village or indigenous cultures, at the age of 13, 14, 15, there's an explosion in the psyche. Something happens in the psyche where we try to do that individuation process. Now, indigenous cultures understood this, and especially for men, because we spoke about this a little bit earlier on. If we do not go through that initiation in terms of separating ourselves from the mother, then we will spend our entire lives getting into partnerships and relationships with mother-type figures because we never fully let go of the apron strings of our mother. So this is absolutely essential for the male psyche whenever he reaches that age to separate himself from the mother. And when we think about as a male, then whenever we were in the womb and whenever we were being conceived, we were tied directly to our mother. So our experience of the feminine was literally through that umbilical cord. But whenever we're brought into the world, we still have that connection to the mother. So the point of initiation was to separate ourselves from our family. And in some initiations, then we actually got a new name after we went through the initiation. There was an understanding that we were adults in ourselves. And that we were, that yes, our mother and our father had brought us into this world, but we became adults in ourselves. So it was absolutely essential. But a lot of us as men in Ireland, especially because of the stories of our own cultures, this, and the stories of Catholicism and so on in terms of like community and that, mummies, boys in Ireland, these stories. Well, a lot of us are fucking wrapped up in that apron string,
Yeah.
And we never had that initiation to be able to go through. And that was quite an intense initiation. And I've spoken about this before, that actually in some of the tribal cultures, they would set it up. So the elders knew that it was happening in the psyche of the child. There was this violence, there was this challenge, and I know this in my life because I think in the masculine male needs this challenge because we never had the initiation. And this is how we end up in gangs. This is how we end up robbing shit. This is how we end up stealing cars. This is how we end up like being in, I was going to say gunfights, but we are in Ireland here. But there's a thing about getting involved in the fucking danger,
Yeah.
because the masculine psyche never went through that challenge of making, it's a second birth,
Yeah.
of making our way into the world as a man. Now, we came through the womb, we came through the vagina, we made it into the physical world, but the psyche never went through that second birth into being a man. So we never went through the small opening and the challenge of getting through this fucking cave and re-emerging as a man. So we act out this challenge in the world because it's something that's trying to happen in the psyche that we were never given. So we now have created this framework that young men are fucked up, bad, violent individuals. They're not fucked up because of themselves, but they're fucked up because society doesn't have a framework of understanding the need that's in their psyche of breaking in to being a full male in this world, autonomous in his own self. So this is important information. And I would suggest at the age of 29, then whenever you went through this initiation, it was because you didn't have it as a child. And I didn't have it as a child. And at 20 years old, and I went through this kind of break where I was able to see a bigger life that was beyond the life that I had been pushed into, you know?
Yeah. I'm excited hearing you speak about this.
Yeah.
I heard you speak about this initiation process on Pat. We keep saying Pat Divilly, obviously, is who we're referring to here on his podcast. And for me, it's a puzzle piece that answers so many questions for me that I've been confused about lately with all of this toxic masculinity conversation, this patriarchy thing, this externalization, this anger, this blame, this aggression. And please, I'm not discounting the fact that there's a lot of conversation around women that we're maybe not having here at the moment, but I'm trying to stay very focused on the masculinity thing, just for now.
Yeah.
When you spoke about this initiation process, you've all just heard my story there. What did that lack was an initiation process. There was at no point when all of this was happening to me and this angst and anger and aggression and somewhere there was nothing to channel that. There was no challenge put in front of me that I could harness all this energy and apply and gain an understanding of, that's how I funnel all this stuff that's coming through me. That's how I embrace it.
Yes.
This is how I do it. Nothing. Yeah. So I became a 29-year-old boy.
Yeah, exactly.
I was a boy, still a boy.
Yeah.
And now I'm still a boy, but now I'm learning. I've gone through some level of traumatic initiation with all 2 years of craziness, and I'm starting to try and understand. Become a man. This is a man is not because you've got a job and you're making $100,000 a year, and that's not a man. A man is an embracing of all of this stuff that you feel, and acknowledgement of it, and an application of it. And I found it really interesting because when I was younger, I read a lot of fantasy books, a lot. I was fascinated by fantasy. I was fascinated by the journeys, the typical the word has escaped me now. The typical story of the hero,
the hero's journey,
and in almost every one of those types of stories, there was some sort of representation of when a boy became a man and a girl became a woman. So, for example, in a lot of the books, a girl wasn't allowed to unbraid her hair until she became a woman, and obviously it was linked with her menstrual cycle and all that kind of stuff. There was a natural progression there for a woman, and it was then accepted that you are no longer a girl. You're not a child.
Yeah.
You don't sit at the children's table. You don't wake up in the morning and go play with the children. You are now a woman. You are now accepted into our group of women, and we will teach you and harness this female energy and teach you to embrace being a woman and how powerful being a woman is, and you're now a woman. And everything that goes with that. And then for the man, he wakes up one day and he's like, okay, you no longer go outside now and play football with the guys. You now come with us and we're going hunting and we're going to catch dinner and we're going to funnel all this energy that you have, and we're going to teach you how to harness that and become a man, and we're going to challenge you with that energy. And he becomes a man. And usually in those stories, it was a hunting party or he becomes a soldier or something like that. But there was always a defining moment where there was a challenge put in front of this person and they became a man or a woman.
Well, there was a challenge put in front of the person. And the other part that's coming to me around that is it was ritualized.
And it was ritualized.
It was ritualized, and the thing is, like, as cognitive beings living in our heads, we're like, oh yeah, sure, I'm 35 now, I must be a man.
Yeah.
But from the perspective of the psyche or the soul, it's the ritualization and the symbology and the understanding of stories. So whenever a woman then, as you say, like she was celebrated whenever she started to bleed.
Yeah.
And there was an understanding, it was a sacred portal, into her womanhood. And that was celebrated. That was acknowledged. And that was really, the beauty of the symbology of a woman moving into womanhood. And if we think about that in contrast to modern societies, like, listen, I can't speak for women here, but I have heard stories, whenever women have gone to their mom and said, "Mom, I'm starting to bleed from down there," and then their mom's like, "Oh Jesus, here's a pad," and like, and there's that sense of like it's not celebrated anymore; it's shamed in women.
100. I literally heard a story on Friday.
Yeah.
A young girl obviously had her first period, and her mother refused to talk about it.
Wow.
And she had to go to, it was a friend's partner, a woman who was like, oh my God, no, this is powerful.
Yeah.
But her mother was embarrassed by it.
Yeah.
And now, what I see now is we are now, like, I'm 33, so my peer group are having children now and they're becoming mothers. And we are the people who are lost and confused and traumatized and out of touch with ourselves. How are we supposed to be able to embrace and ritualize and connect with this young girl or young boy and help them if we didn't even do it ourselves.
No.
It's so I accept it. I don't shame the mother who did that with her daughter. I know she's dealing with her own stuff.
Yeah.
But within the space of one generation, we've lost that. Well, not really. It's many generations, we've definitely lost that. You are now a woman. This is amazing. This is cause for celebration.
Yes.
We need to lean into this
Yes.
and embrace this. And the same, it's a different way it happens with men, obviously, because there's no physical menstruation or something that physically marks you out to be a woman or a man now.
Yeah.
But
the main piece for me around that is, so I think you're very, very right. There's no physical representation. The main thing is that as a woman then steps into her own womanhood, as a being who was birthed from the mother, from the feminine as such, she in some ways can become an extension of that feminine, But for a man, we need to separate ourselves from the mother because that's the only way that we truly get to embrace our own masculinity. Now, we also need to find our own sense of femininity. So there are different dynamics that are going on here in terms of a woman's initiation into womanhood and a boy's initiation into manhood. Because there's something, and I'm not sure exactly what this is, but I'm just having that sense of there's a different feeling for me because I've just trying to, my entire life is about trying to unravel the apron strings from around my fucking neck. Because it's had a direct impact on my relationships. It's had a direct impact on my relationship with my mum and so on. So women will have a different sense of that, and they will have their own relationship with their father and how their father, related to whenever the menstrual cycle started to start as well, So there are different dynamics that are kind of going on in this. But it really makes me feel sad whenever you talk about that story of this girl that her mum wasn't able to see that. And yes, we don't have a framework for that, but we're also at the opportunity now from listening to this podcast, from listening to other things that are happening in the world, that we can stand up and say, we can't treat women like this anymore. When it comes from shame of the church, it comes from shame of our own sexuality. It comes from a shame of our own bodies that's still alive. And we need to be challenging that now. And not even just like holding it as like this is acceptable. If we can possibly ritualize it, and really start to celebrate it, then we emerge on the other side where we start to celebrate the beauty of what it is to be a woman and the beauty of what it is to be a man as a separate individual. We're different people. The more I embrace that, the more beauty I get in the world and the more I can accept women for the beauty that they are. Do you know?
Yeah.
But the more I try and see that I'm similar to women or women are similar to me, the more expectations I have of them being a certain way and the more expectations I have on myself to be a certain way.
You are really neatly highlighting what is a very topical issue right now, which is a conflict, not just it stems from the conflict with the individual, but between men and women.
Yep.
That last bit you said there is a very, very constant conversation at the moment about equality. But again, I'll say this before, and people can disagree if they like. I think that conversation is completely missing the point. You said something on Pat's podcast. I'm referring to this a lot because I listened to it and it's a fascinating conversation for me about this initiation process. And what happened was the man had his ritualized initiation with the men, and the women, the girl, had the ritualized initiation with the woman. They learned individually how to be a man and how to be a woman. And as a result, when they came together, there was a complete acceptance and understanding of the man was like, oh, look at this divine feminine, this woman, she's amazing, it's incredible, it's powerful, it's beautiful, and she's living that. She's projecting that, and I am picking that up. I'm picking up what you're laying down there. And for the woman to meet the man, she was very aware that this man was in touch with his masculine, had separated himself from the feminine to become his own man, and through that process was incredibly attractive. And I don't just mean sexually attractive, I mean just in terms of the overall energy and the connection was attractive to me as a female. We don't have those processes anymore.
No.
So now when I as a man interact with a woman, it is riddled with subtext. And the woman thinks, now please don't take this as disrespectful, she is supposed to be the same as a man. And the man thinks he's supposed to be less manly because it's toxic and unhelpful to society. So he's undermining his own sense of masculinity.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned to you before, I observe this in myself and certain friends, and I see different reactions. I see some men who would tend to be more, I don't know, more not masculine, more aggressive, confrontational type of men,
Sure.
immediately push back. Fuck this, feminism, bullshit. The women want us to be less men, and they get really angry. And then I see some men who kind of go, okay, yeah, we'll go along with that because we want everyone to be friends, and I want you to accept me because you're a woman, and I need you to accept me because you're a woman. And
mother stuff.
Yeah. So I see this played out in many different ways, and it's causing huge conflict. And with women, I see it play out in certain ways as well. As some women are very upset and perturbed because they still have a connection with the feminine, but haven't been taught what that means, and they're very confused by this. And some women are incredibly aggressive about pulling down the patriarchy and all this. And I do agree that there have been many instances of men abusing women in the past. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying there are terrible things that happen. But what I am saying is that's all been pushed into one big conversation piece now, is that we need less aggressive men, less masculine men, and more assertive women. And I'm like, whoa, we're missing the fucking point here, because we haven't gone through our initiations. So now we're meeting as people who have no idea what we are ourselves. And by extension, we're now having massive conflict with the opposite sex, as opposed to having this, what should be a deep understanding connection of each other, because we have a deep understanding connection with ourselves.
A celebration of diversity.
A celebration of diversity instead of trying to reach this, what people think is a utopia where we're all the same, we all do the same thing and have the same, like I believe in equality, obviously. Yeah. I believe in equal opportunity, obviously. But when I say something like I've just said there, it's interpreted as, I think women should go back to the kitchen and men should go out hunting and living like... That's not what I'm saying. But it's very hard to have that conversation. So I'm excited to hear your approach to that, because you're very eloquent and experienced with this type of thing. And it's about bringing more people into the conversation.
So I have another thing I have to do now. So I'm going to have to leave, I'm afraid. I'm sorry. So this is a complex... Very, very complex. And I also just want to kind of introduce with, I'm still learning this as well, you know?
All of us are. Yeah.
So I think for both of us, just to say that whatever we say here is from a place of curiosity and learning as well, you know, in terms of this is a subject that is unfolding in our own psyches, as you know, as people in Ireland and potentially all over the world. Yeah.
And sorry to cut across before, just to offer ultimate context to this. I love women. I love men. I think we should all live happily together, and we should find that level of balance. But I believe it comes from the internal, and I think most of what the conversations we're having are externalizing. I just wanted to clarify that. Sure. I love people. I love women and I love men. Yeah. So that's where all this is coming from in me. Yeah. I just want to be very clear on that. Yeah.
So the problem I see in this is the oneness. That there's an expectation between men and women. I'm going to contextualize this a little bit better in a moment.
Yes.
So there's an expectation that men should be more like women. So because of the past, the trauma in the past and so on, that for a man to fully express his own masculinity could be potentially triggering, threatening and so on because of our past traumas. So in terms of society at the moment, then there's a bit of a pushback to the masculine. We have the Me Too movement. It's coming to light now, the abuse of men and power over women. So this is very fucking real.
Yeah.
So as you said, then your friend, either there's a reaction where it'd be like, well, fuck this, you know, I'm a man and don't attack me for being a man. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's an unacceptance of, yes, maybe you haven't done something personally, but there's a trauma that's in the psyche that needs to be addressed. Or the other reaction to that is that we go into like, okay, well, I'm going to be a little bit more meek. I'm going to be a little bit more gentle. I'm going to be a little bit more of that, okay? So there are two options with that. As we go back to earlier on, it's also an understanding that how we reacted then is in our own selves is a direct reflection of our own internal battle with these parts of ourselves, you know? So how do we relate to our own masculinity? How do you relate to our own femininity within ourselves, you know? So the masculine then, so my experience of that is I just went a little bit more gentle because I was told, you know, I remember sitting with female friends in my like teenage years and so on, and they were like, oh, men are assholes, and they do all this sort of stuff. And I'd be sitting going like, yeah, dickheads. Yeah. And, you know, and I had created this superiority complex of myself. And because I wanted to be accepted by the feminine mother. And I was like dismissing my own masculine, you know? So in terms of my own internal dynamic, I was literally dismissing my own sense of masculine energy to be accepted by the feminine. So these are dynamics that are playing around. And when we really start to like look at what's happening within us, you know, and then so for another person then who's quite defensive around the masculine, it's like, fuck you.
Me? Yeah.
Yeah. You know, so we will have our own our own stories and our own dynamics in terms of like, well, why is your masculine defensive in that moment? You know, what is going on there? Is this like you're trying to take my power away from me? If you identify masculinity with power, somebody's challenging that. You're saying, well, you're taking me away from myself. So that can be very challenging as well.
Yeah.
So that's looking at it from this is my own perspective here,
Of course.
from a masculine angle. So for the females then, you know, when we live in a patriarchal society, and for those women then who because in a patriarchal society then it's revered then to be around status, around power, around you know, maybe money and so on like that, then there's been a lot of pressure because we're looking for equality between men and women. There's been a lot of pressure for women to become more masculinized, I would say, you know? And so about women being more aggressive, being more focused, about being more in like high-powered jobs. And so that's okay in itself as well. But if that is where women are losing their own sense of femininity, that's where it becomes an issue. Like if they're truly in line with that way of wanting to be more focused and more like career orientated and earn a lot of money, then that's absolutely fine. But if they're suppressing a part of themselves as a consequence of that, then that becomes an issue for me. So I see that there's an unbalance. We have a patriarchal society where the masculine is revered. So this is having a direct impact on both men and women. Women are becoming more masculinized, and men are becoming more feminized. So we're kind of creating this kind of generic soup in the center where neither of us are truly stepping into either. So from there, I'm going to start to separate out this oneness into, as men, as women, we both have masculine and we both have feminine. And they can be fully celebrated in both genders. As men, there's a tendencies for us to be have more of a sexual masculine essence, more of that presence, more of that focus, more of that connected to consciousness. As women, there's more of a tendency to have a feminine sexual essence, which is more about being in the body, being in life, being in flow, being in love. As men and women, we both have both. If we can truly see that we can fully integrate those two aspects of ourselves, then we can fully celebrate the masculine and the feminine that is trying to emerge through both sexes, both men and women. So for me, it's been a long journey as an individual to own my own masculinity, understand what that is, and own my own femininity. Own the parts of me that want to fully connect, that want to fully love, that want to fully feel that sense of fulfillment from the world, and own the other parts of me that just wants to be fucking getting on with shit. And wants to be fully in life, fully focused, and fully challenging myself in a masculine way. So once we start to identify that these are energies that live through both men and women, I don't need a woman to be a particular way for me to feel more okay in myself. They don't need me to be a particular way for them to be fully themselves. So the problem at the moment is that we've created this idea of patriarchy and that masculinity as being, again, we're talking about balance here, as being like the definitive way of being. We're out of balance. So all beings and men are being affected by the patriarchy in terms of like being overworked, overfocused, all that sort of stuff. And then women are also doing the same thing, but we've lost the feminine in the world. We've lost the care of the body. We've lost the care of the soul. We've lost the care of how it is to be a normal human in this world at this time. Okay.
I'm very aware, as I'm nodding along, agreeing with absolutely every word that's coming out of your mouth here, that we're two men sitting having a conversation here.
Sure.
Have you had this conversation with women?
Yes.
How has that conversation gone? How has the reaction been?
Oh. So I was in a relationship last year, and it's been very interesting for me then to be able to reflect on that relationship from the context of this framework of masculine and feminine. Because I started to recognize that there were different parts of me that were online at different times. So there were parts of me that just wanted to get on with my own shit and just kind of be in my own flow and do my own things. And then there were other parts of me then that would come up where I really wanted to be in that state of connection. I really wanted to be sharing and to be in that way. And also noticing those parts in her as well. So once we really started to identify then these two energies that are trying to live out and play through us, then we can be more accepting. And sometimes those two energies then come together. Maybe the two feminines in the man and the woman come together where they really want to connect well. And sometimes the energies like don't, where the man's in the masculine, the feminine's in wanting in connection. And then there's like a bit of a conflict that happens, But when we understand our needs, then we can start to have that negotiation and say, okay, listen, I can't be with you for this morning because I have shit to do. But this evening, maybe I'll be more free and maybe we can spend a little bit of time there with each other. So, and so the feminine then that was maybe playing out in the female at the time, then she has that sense of, okay, that's cool. I can connect with him later, So, and then whenever a woman then, if she's more in her masculine, she just wants to get on with shit. And I know that because I have quite a strong like emotional feminine within me, and noticing then that I really want to spend time with her, that we have that conversation as well and understand, oh, actually her masculine is activated here. She has a load of shit that she needs to do. And maybe we need to have a conversation about when I can spend time with her, So I think that it's what it's, I can speak specifically about this relationship. I think that when we were able to understand the dynamics that were acting out in her and in our relationship, I think that there's a real acceptance and dropping into that I don't have to be either or. I can be both.
Okay.
So she's able to be fully her own feminine in those times when she really wants to connect, in those times when she's feeling a little bit more vulnerable, in those times where she's feeling that, she wants that like nourishing, loving space or whatever. She can be fully that. And in those other times where she just wants to get on with shit and doesn't want to speak to me or anyone else, that she can be fully that as well. And we're not having this sense of diluting those two aspects of ourselves. We're like, I really want to get on with my shit, but I feel like I should be spending time with this person.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
So I think that when men as women, we can accept that we both have these different energies that are trying to play through us, we can fully drop into ourselves. And that's really helped me to own my own masculine of like, sometimes don't fucking bother me. Because what I'm doing is I'm fully in my own flow. You talked about this earlier on, listening to a podcast or something. So I'm going to frame this a little bit deeper now. So what is the masculine? What is the feminine? How does that play out in our lives? So the masculine, in terms of this, I'm going to put this back. We're going to start to get a little bit complex. I'm going to try and keep it as grounded as I can.
Okay.
So in the understanding of Eastern traditions, they talked about the center of consciousness being in our dantian. This is in the Chinese medicine, or in the hara, which is in the Japanese medicine. So the hara, the dantian, is the abdomen. This is the lower part of ourselves. So the masculine energy that's living through us as humans, whether we're men or women, is consciousness itself. So consciousness is trying to live into the world. And the feminine then, if you want to call it the feminine is the world itself. It is actual matter and so on. So whenever then, as a masculine being then in this world, whenever I accept that consciousness itself in those moments, because as a masculine identified being, I get my sense of peace. I get my sense of like fully being in myself when I'm resting in that consciousness. And I don't know if you can, I'd love to hear if you can relate to this. through my spiritual development into my mid-30s, I wasn't doing fucking yoga anymore. I wasn't doing any ritual in the morning. I wasn't doing any of that shit. I was sitting staring at fucking walls. Because there's a processing that's happening there. There's being resting in consciousness, resting in the consciousness of the masculine. And that's where we get our sense of nourishment. That's where we get our sense of peace. So for those of us who are masculine identified beings, having that downtime, watching the match on the screen, having this sitting out in nature, going to the top of a mountain and just staying there and being in that consciousness, that's what we need. And whenever we're in that consciousness, there's a part of us that's just like, I don't want to connect here. I just want to be in my own sense of expansiveness, my own sense of in almost infinity itself, because that's what consciousness is. It's all potential that's about to come into this world. Okay. So that's identifying the masculine. These are frameworks. These are ideas here.
Yeah.
I also want to say this is from John Wineland. This is something I've been exploring a lot recently. Looking at the feminine. So feminine is life itself. So feminine is that sense of love, is that sense of like flow. It's about being in the world. It's about moving. It's about just being in nature. Nature is always changing, you know. So for the consciousness of the masculine, he kind of gets a little bit intimidated by that, because he's like, I'm just trying to sit in silence here. Why is this thing happening over here?
Yeah. So
there's a bit of a conflict going on between these energies. Now, this is not to identify men or women here. It's about these energies. They're different. So for those of us who identify as feminine essence beings, that's about connection. That's about love, you know? And for women then who identified as a feminine essence being, her nourishment, her sense of self will come from connection. Will come from connection with her own self, will come from her connection to love, from connection to her own heart. You know, and at some points then as a man, then I will also, that feminine will be more alive in me, and that's what I will need, more connection, more love, more whatever, you know. So it's about understanding that the feminine then, she is about life itself. It's always about movement. It's always about change, and it's always about love and what's actually happening in the world. So we have these two polarities that live within us. And they're kind of fighting for each other. And the thing about the masculine is his ultimate aim is freedom. That's where he's always aiming for. And, you know, as a masculine identified being, I understand that. There's always a part of me that's trying to get the fuck out of there. But once we can really honor and understand that that's what consciousness is trying to do, that's its nature, then we can fully own that part of ourselves and say, listen, I really want to get out of here, but I'm really here. And I'm really in this relationship, even though there's a part of my deeper sense of self that really wants to be free. And then we can start to play with that, as opposed to, as most men do, is just ignore that part that wants to be free all the time. Yeah?
Yeah.
And then we're just like fighting with the woman. She's like, I just feel like you don't want to be here. And it's like, no, I definitely want to be here. And she's like, I fucking know you don't want to be here.
Yeah.
Okay? So we're going to go, I'll go on to the feminine, and then we can come to you.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So the thing about the feminine is she is life itself. She is matter. She is beauty. She is, and her thing is that she's always trying to get filled up. She always wants more love, you know? And as somebody who's been in relationships many times, I'm like, okay, well, I spent a lot of time with her yesterday. Why does she want more from me?
Okay.
Why? I just did this whole thing for her, and now she's still wanting more from me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Because, and that's not, we can't blame women for this, or we can't blame men who are in their feminine for this. That's the feminine life. That's the feminine energy that's trying to live through her, which is always wanting more. Always wanting more. So once she then recognizes, like, oh, that's the part of me that will never be fully filled, then she can also own that and say, listen, I really want more here, but I understand what's happening here, and I understand that you're doing your best here as a masculine identified being, whether that be men or women. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So these dynamics are kind of playing out through us as men and women. So I think it's really important to know, and once we start to understand these dynamics, then we can stop blaming women for being this way, stop blaming men for being this way, and stop trying to be more like a man or trying to be more like a woman, you know?
I'm taking time to process this, because it's really powerful stuff. And it's becoming increasingly aware to me the more I speak to someone like yourself who's exploring these topics so deeply, and you're connecting with great minds who've also explored these topics and people who write about this and who study this, how the hell are we expecting it to be any different now when these issues are so complex and they're so connected with understanding of yourself and your masculine and your feminine?
Yes.
And it's not a neutral playing field where we're all just sitting here giving ourselves time to figure this out. We have a third party involved in this, and it's the fucking world driving messages at us, distracting us actively from having any time to think about what you've just explained there. Well, I'm processing here everything you just explained there because it makes a lot of sense to me from an observational point of view, looking at. Let me put this in context. I watched a very interesting video about 6 months ago on dopamine in the brain, specifically related to pornography. And there's people like Andrew Huberman and people like this who explore the neuroscience of decision making and how you feel and the connection with hormones and that kind of stuff, which I've explained before is an important element of this entire puzzle.
Sure, of course.
You can't ignore the spiritual, you can't ignore the physical.
Well, they're related.
They're related. There's no separation.
Yeah.
So I watched this video, and it was about a 15-20 minute video on the effects of pornography on the male brain. And it was fascinating from a scientific point of view. But they finished off with this little story about this couple, and this man has trauma or something in his life. Something leads him to becoming addicted, or watching, not addicted yet, pornography. And that pornography, that distraction, that trigger in his brain, that dopamine, whatever, draws him deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper to the point where he's addicted to pornography. And what he sacrifices for that is everything he's giving to the pornography, he should be giving to the relationship with his partner.
Yeah.
So based on what you've just explained to me there, her need for that engagement is now being taken away by pornography and his job and his competition with other men and everything else, but pornography in this specific. And he has no chance because it's literally pinging the right dopamine center in his brain. So even if he was able to figure this out, he's now addicted. He's now an addict to pornography. And she's not getting what she needs from that relationship. Then he's not getting what he needs from her because she's now said, but you know what, I'm trying for connection here, fuck this, and I'm going to go elsewhere for my connection. And sometimes maybe it's an affair, but in most cases with women it's not. It's internalizing it and it's focusing on the children or themselves, or trying to go down the other route of I'll become a manly or a masculine, I'll chase this career now, and the relationship completely disintegrates. Not because those two people don't love each other, but because something has hijacked this system, this understanding of the masculine, this understanding of the brain and the physical. And this man has gone down a path, and the entire relationship has imploded because it's triggered a series of interactions that I now understand after listening to you speak have a huge connection with this masculine and feminine as well. Because now he's not having that space he needs to be in by himself to go off and do his thing is now here on the phone or the computer and in the pornography and on Instagram and all that kind of stuff. So that's not healthy for him.
No.
So he's becoming less healthy as a masculine. And as a result, the female or the feminine, and I'm aware as well we could have same-sex relationships, but there also is a masculine and feminine energy with two men or two women.
Yeah, so that really includes all
that. It includes everything. Yeah, I'm just saying a man and a woman, but I'm not discounting anybody else.
Yeah.
But now the feminine is not getting what the feminine needs from that relationship, and it completely disintegrates. And I'm really sad at the moment. You mentioned the pandemic before. I'm really sad when I see relationships and communities break down because of third-party intervention and distraction, rather than relationships and community being built up because of someone like you, Niall, building a collection of people, men and women, who are speaking to themselves and to each other and growing. I'm seeing a community and a tribe and a society breaking down. And I'm going to use certain words here. It's by design to the level that if a company wants to sell me something, it's in their interest to distract me as much as I fucking possibly can to sell me that thing.
Yeah.
That company's not evil. They're trying to sell me something. I run a business. I understand that.
Yeah.
But the end result is I'm distracted from what I actually should be focusing on, which is myself and my energy and my purpose and my identity and my growth and my connection and my community, because I want to buy the fucking new iPhone. So I'm distracted by it. Call it conspiracy or evil, or I'm not anti-capitalist or anything like that, but we are being distracted. The end result is we're distracted. We're distracted by the porn, we're distracted by Instagram, we're distracted by everything else. And then all of a sudden, my missus is acting weird around me. The fuck is her problem?
Yeah.
And all she's doing is reacting to my problems.
Sure.
And now I'm reacting to her problems.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we hate each other.
Yeah.
We break up. We've got 2 kids. We've got a house. Oh, fuck, our life is fucked. We have to break up, mortgage back. So I'm just seeing this played out over and over and over and over and over and over again. The pandemic, I saw friends, I saw families, I saw communities break apart over this. Now, it was a serious issue. It was an issue around the world. But what happened from that? The weaponization and politicization and fear-mongering connected to what happened over the last 2 years broke people down. And for me, for a relationship to break down over something like that means there's no anchor there. There's nothing solid there to begin with, because it was so superficial. The relationship was on such a superficial level with the individuals and each other that it was easily divided by a political narrative or something that happened.
So once we become disempowered as humans, so once we lose our sense of indigenousness, which is indigenous means from place.
Yeah.
So for me, there's that sense of place. That's kind of our sense of connection to the land. That's kind of the foundation of everything. The indigenous teachings then teach us about frameworks of what it is to be alive. So the framework of initiation. You're going to go through difficulty. And the soul is always trying to break into new territory. And that's what relationships are. The relationships are always trying to break into new levels of love and new, deeper levels of love. And when we understand that men and women are different and that the masculine and the feminine, like in the native cultures, they call them two-spirit people who had these energies, more balanced so that they would live out into the world. So there was an understanding of these two energies that we're trying to live through the world. So once we lose the greater depth of what it is to be humans, we become subject to the narrative that is being fed to us every fucking day on that phone. And then that's when relationships starts to fall apart, because we're like, oh, well, my relationship isn't like acting out the way it should be in society. This isn't a Disney story. Oh, well, fuck the Disney story then. I'm going to just leave this relationship because I'm going to find someone who's better and someone who is going to fulfill that narrative that I've been told from a very young age about, how relationships are supposed to be. When we gain a better understanding of what life is from indigenous teachings, from the teacher being nature, which has been a large part of my understanding, is understanding we're very much connected to the land, connected to the nature. And then we can start to recognize what's happening and we can start to make more objective decisions. It's like, okay, well, something's trying to happen in this relationship. We're in a pandemic now and there's fear being kind of fed to us every day. There is something that's fundamentally trying to happen between us here. So understanding then this in the context of masculine and feminine stuff, understanding this in the context of initiation, understanding this in a broader picture of what it is to be human. Do we still want to be together or do we want to work through this stuff? What's at play here? But we've been given such a fucking small story by society that I don't know how anyone stays together.
Yeah.
But whenever we start to reframe these things of what's trying to happen through relationship, and that the relationships themselves will always go through tension, and create, and you were talking about being together with your partner for 15 years, and actually now it's starting to emerge into something. It takes that time. And for me to understand relationship in the sense of like, as a masculine identified being, I'm constantly on this fucking journey of discovery, And I was feeling then that relationships were holding me back. So the feminine was holding me back from this fucking mission that I'm on. But through this past relationship, recognizing that she's on her own fucking mission as well. And actually we can be on this mission together.
Yeah.
That's exciting for me. And then actually through the relationship that I can learn more about life. I can learn more about how to connect to people. I can learn a bit more about like, how do I be on my mission while this other person's also on their mission, while we're also just trying to connect together and eat food together. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then our relationships become exciting as opposed to something that's trying to hold me back in life. Life is always trying to live through us. The more we think that we're in control of our lives, the more fucking sorry we'll be. I can promise you that much. But the more that life is trying to work through us and that our own unconscious like stories are trying to be resolved through relationship, through life, through work, through people, through friends, the more we get to really step into like a deeper sense of life, a deeper sense of relationship,
Yeah, it's amazing. that word arrogance keeps coming back to me as well. The arrogance of thinking that if I get in an argument with my fiance's name is Jill, if I get in an argument with Jill, obviously I'm right because this is my opinion. This is what I think. Why can't you just see that and not accepting? She listens to this. I'm going to get a roasted now. I've lost all power. Not accepting that there's much deeper. It's not about the fucking dishwasher. It's not about the job.
There's deeper stuff
it's
going on.
So much deeper.
Yeah, there's deeper needs.
Yeah.
There's deeper one. Yeah.
And in 90, I'm going to say 99% of cases, when I have a problem, it's probably my problem. If I have a problem with her, it's probably my problem. If she's a problem with me, it's probably her. But now it's probably certain things that I do that maybe can be modified in terms of behaviors.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like, so for me, it's about once we understand what's going on with ourselves, then we can come to the other person with a more truer sense. If I'm getting triggered by something, I'm really fucking angry.
Yeah.
And then I start to have this discussion with her about it. And then it all comes out in her and then she gets triggered, blah, blah, blah. But if I can spend a little bit of time, as you said before, just like sitting with something, having an awareness around what's going on for me, what is the learning in this for me? And then there are maybe other parts that need to be addressed as well. You know, in the Mankind Project, we use this framework. It's like, what would you like from this man knowing that you may not get it? Do you know what I'm saying?
Okay.
So we can put something out there and saying, listen, I don't have any expectation. We don't have any control over anyone else. We can try and assert that control if we want to. We're going to be disappointed. But what we can't put out there is like, listen, I have a request here. I have a want here. And you're fully autonomous in your own self about whether you can engage with that. But if we're putting it out there with no expectation of how it's going to be, then the other person can say, actually, I can do that.
Yeah.
I can do that. Do you know?
Yeah.
So it's about when we have these arguments or when we have these triggers, how are we able to manage them, knowing that they're always invitations to own parts of ourselves, and most of it's just fucking mother shit for me.
Yeah, that's gas. Yeah, it's interesting because this extends far beyond the bounds of romantic relationships. This is just connection with other human beings, I suppose, and I've often viewed it as like The Sims or something like that. When I meet another person, it's not me and that person meeting. It's my avatar.
Yeah.
And that person's avatar.
Very
all
good.
of my behaviors and traumas and all the shit that I've built up for myself is meeting all their behaviors and shit that they've built up for themselves. It's a protective mechanism because I don't want to be vulnerable with this person. So they'll meet my avatar and I meet their avatar. And what I've noticed is really interesting, to go even deeper than that, the avatars will have an interaction and I will observe that interaction and I won't absorb most of the positive from the interaction, but I absorb all of that negative because I have a negativity bias. So if it was a bad interaction, I'll take all of that on board. If it was good, it probably won't make an impact on my life. But if it was bad, geez, I'll take that up. They made a comment or it was uncomfortable. I'll just absorb all that. That didn't actually happen. That was my behaviors and trauma dealing with that person's behaviors and trauma. And I'm talking about anybody. I'm not talking about romantic relationships. And as a result, I internalize more negativity and trauma. I believe the bad things I've told myself even more. And despite the fact that I might have said 10 good things, I have a negativity bias as a human being. I'll just absorb all that bad shit. And that's not helpful. And that leads me on a path of 20, 30, 40, 50. I'm not embodying myself more. I'm becoming more traumatized.
Smaller, yeah.
And then I have a midlife crisis or I have an explosion or it comes out somewhere in my life, my relationship breaks down, something happens. And I don't think that's avoidable unless I'm aware and I'm aware of the arrogance, I'm aware of the behaviours, I'm aware of the trauma and I can do something to try and counteract that.
Yeah.
But it's very, very powerful stuff. Guys, that is the end of part 1 of this 2-part episode with Mr. Niall Graham. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, Niall is running his workshop for men, Strong Warrior, Sensitive Heart, on Sunday, the 20th of March from 2 to 6 p.m. And he has included a 20% discount for all of the listeners of this podcast. So if you are interested, make sure you get in touch with Niall at niall.graham@hotmail.com. Or go on his website and use the code Prymal20, that's Prymal20, on niallgraham.ie to book your spot on the course. Thank you again for listening. Thank you so much for Niall for such a great and interesting conversation. And I will see you in part 2.